My wealthy in-laws thought they could humiliate me by banning me from their 30th anniversary party at the exclusive Riverside Country Club. They had no idea I was a decorated Marine colonel who'd commanded thousands of troops in 3 combat deployments. What happened when the venue's security team arrived left the entire Morrison family and their high society guests absolutely speechless. Colonel Elena Rodriguez adjusted her simple black dress as she sat in her modest Honda Civic outside the towering iron gates of Riverside Country Club.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
At 38, she looked like any other suburban mom picking up her kids from an event. Tired eyes, minimal makeup, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. What the valet attendants rushing past her car didn't know was that just 18 months ago, she'd been overseeing military operations across 2 provinces in Afghanistan. Elena had taken early retirement from the Marines after her husband David's cancer diagnosis. The medical bills were crushing their family financially, and someone needed to be home full-time to care for him during his treatments. So here she was, trading her colonel's uniform for civilian clothes, her commanding presence for quiet endurance, all while David fought the battle of his life. The Riverside Country Club sat majestically on 50 acres of manicured lawns overlooking Lake Michigan. Its white limestone facade and towering columns spoke of old money and established power, the kind of place where Elena's in-laws, Richard and Patricia Morrison, felt most comfortable displaying their wealth. Tonight, they were celebrating their 30th wedding anniversary with 300 of Chicago's social elite. Elena checked her phone. 6:45 p.m. The invitation had said cocktails at 7, dinner at 8. She'd spent weeks planning to attend this party, not because she enjoyed these events, but because it meant everything to David. His parents had always treated Elena like an outsider, the middle-class daughter of Mexican immigrants who'd somehow trapped their precious son. But David loved his parents despite their flaws. And attending family events was one of the few things that still brought him joy during his chemotherapy treatments. She thought about David back home, too weak from his latest treatment to make the 2-hour drive to Chicago. "Go represent us, mi amor," he'd whispered that morning, squeezing her hand with what little strength he had. "Show them that the Rodriguez women don't back down." Elena smiled, remembering her own military training. Her subordinates had learned never to underestimate the quiet intensity behind her calm exterior, a lesson that had served her well during her 15-year career climbing from enlisted Marine to full colonel. The country club's valet stand bustled with activity as luxury cars dropped off guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Elena watched a Bentley pull up, followed by a Tesla, then a Mercedes. She looked down at her dress, a simple black number from Target that she'd worn to David's work events. It would have to do. The military had taught her that confidence came from within, not from the cost of your clothing. As Elena walked toward the club's entrance, she automatically assessed her surroundings, a habit ingrained from years of military service. She noted the security cameras, the discreet earpieces worn by staff members, and the professional bearing of the men in dark suits stationed near the entrances. This wasn't just any private party. The Riverside Country Club was known for hosting events for politicians, celebrities, and business leaders who required serious security measures. The massive oak doors opened to reveal a stunning marble foyer with crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of the club's founding members. Elena could hear the gentle hum of conversation and clinking glasses from the main ballroom, where the anniversary celebration was already in full swing. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders with military precision, and prepared to face whatever the evening would bring. Through the ballroom's French doors, she could see Patricia Morrison holding court near the champagne fountain, her silver hair perfectly styled, her designer gown sparkling under the chandeliers. Richard stood nearby, glad-handing business associates, while wearing the kind of confident smile that came from never having to worry about money. Neither had called to ask about David's latest test results. Elena approached the reception desk where a young woman in a black suit was checking names against a guest list. "Good evening," Elena said politely. "Elena Rodriguez, here for the Morrison anniversary celebration." The receptionist scanned her list twice, then looked up with a confused expression. "I'm sorry, ma'am, But I don't see your name here. Could you check your invitation? Elena pulled out her phone, showing the digital invitation David had forwarded to her weeks ago. The receptionist frowned, then picked up her phone to make a quiet call. Elena waited patiently, drawing on years of military discipline to remain calm despite the growing knot in her stomach. A few minutes later, a tall man in an expensive suit approached. Elena recognized him immediately. James Morrison, David's older brother, and Patricia's obvious favorite. His face wore the same condescending expression she'd seen at every family gathering for the past 8 years. "Elena," James said, his voice carrying across the marble foyer loud enough for other guests to hear. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Elena felt her military training kick in, the same calm alertness that had served her during tense negotiations with Afghan tribal leaders. Something in James's tone told her this wasn't actually a misunderstanding at all. She noticed how he positioned himself between her and the ballroom entrance, and how the receptionist had suddenly become very interested in paperwork that didn't require her attention. "What kind of misunderstanding?" Elena asked evenly, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd used to command respect from Marines twice her size. James glanced around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the attention their conversation was drawing from other arriving guests. A couple in formal wear slowed their pace to listen, while the valet staff seemed to sense drama brewing. The country club's marble acoustics carried every word. "Well," James began, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a diplomatic whisper. "Mother and father felt it might be best if you didn't attend tonight. You know, given David's situation, and how emotional these family events can become." Elena stood perfectly still, her expression unchanged, but her mind was processing this information with the same tactical precision she'd used to analyze enemy positions. David's situation. They were using her husband's cancer as an excuse to exclude her from their family celebration. The same husband who was at home right now, probably watching the clock and hoping she was having a good time with his parents. "I see," Elena said quietly. "And when exactly did they make this decision?" "Because David received his invitation 6 weeks ago, and I've been planning to attend ever since." A bead of sweat appeared on James's forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "It was a recent decision, very recent. We tried to call, but..." He gestured vaguely, as if phone technology was somehow to blame for this situation. Elena pulled out her phone and checked her call log, her missed messages, even her spam folder. Nothing. She looked back at James with the same steady gaze she'd used during military tribunals. "My phone seems to be working fine. I haven't missed any calls from your family." The couple who'd been eavesdropping had now stopped pretending to examine the oil paintings and were openly staring. Elena could hear them whispering to each other about the drama unfolding in the prestigious club's entrance hall. More guests were beginning to notice the confrontation, their conversations growing quieter as they strained to listen. "Look, Elena," James said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone she'd heard him use with service staff. "This is a very exclusive event, the kind of gathering where people expect a certain level of sophistication. Mother spent months planning this party, and she doesn't want any disruptions." Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. In 15 years of military service, she'd negotiated with warlords, commanded joint operations with foreign militaries, and briefed senators on classified intelligence. She'd earned her rank through competence, courage, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. But to the Morrison family, she would always be the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who wasn't sophisticated enough for their social circle. "Disruptions," she repeated carefully. "Like what, exactly?" James shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing he'd said too much. But his family's arrogance had always been their weakness. They couldn't resist explaining why they were superior to everyone else. "Well, you know, the way you handle yourself in social situations, the way you talk, your background. Tonight there will be congressmen here, federal judges, CEOs of major corporations. These are people who expect to interact with others of their caliber." Elena nodded slowly, her military training keeping her face completely neutral, even as her mind cataloged every word James was saying.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She thought about the federal judges she'd briefed on national security matters, the congressmen who'd sought her expertise on military affairs, the Fortune 500 CEOs who'd consulted with her on international risk assessment. But James Morrison, who'd inherited his position at his father's investment firm, apparently didn't think she was sophisticated enough to share the same air as his guests. The reception area had grown noticeably quieter as more people became aware of the confrontation. Elena could see other guests slowing down as they entered, sensing the tension, but not yet understanding what was happening. The young woman at the reception desk kept glancing nervously between Elena and James, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unsure how to intervene. "I understand," Elena said finally, her voice still calm but carrying an undertone that made James take an unconscious step backward. "So to be absolutely clear, you're telling me that I'm banned from your parents' anniversary party because I'm not sophisticated enough to be around your important guests?" "Now, Elena, don't put words in my mouth. I'm not putting words anywhere," Elena interrupted, her voice still quiet but now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm simply asking you to confirm what you just told me. Am I or am I not banned from this family event?" James looked around desperately, clearly hoping for rescue that wasn't coming. The marble foyer had fallen almost silent, except for the distant sounds of the party continuing in the ballroom. Elena waited patiently for his answer, drawing on the same steady presence that had served her during the most challenging moments of her military career. James Morrison looked around the marble foyer like a trapped animal, his expensive suit suddenly seeming too tight around his collar. The silence stretched between them as other guests continued to arrive, their conversations growing quieter as they sensed the tension radiating from the reception area. "Fine," James finally said, his voice taking on the aggressive edge that Elena had seen him use with waiters and parking attendants. "Yes, you're not welcome here tonight. Mother specifically asked me to handle this situation if you showed up." Elena nodded once, her military training helping her process this information without showing emotion. So Patricia Morrison had anticipated that Elena might actually dare to attend her son's family celebration. The woman had planned this humiliation in advance. "And why exactly did Patricia decide I wasn't welcome at my own husband's family celebration?" Elena asked, her voice remaining steady despite the growing audience of elegantly dressed onlookers. "Because," James said, his voice rising slightly as his frustration grew, "you don't belong here. You never have. Look around you, Elena. This is the Riverside Country Club. These people are senators, federal judges, Fortune 500 CEOs. They're not accustomed to dealing with people like you." A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had gathered in the foyer. Several guests exchanged shocked glances at James's boldness, while others pulled out their phones, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Elena felt the familiar calm that had settled over her during her most challenging military operations. "People like me?" she repeated quietly. "What exactly does that mean, James?" "Oh, come on," James scoffed, emboldened by what he perceived as Elena's passivity. "You know exactly what I mean. You grew up in some working-class neighborhood in San Antonio. Your father worked construction. Your mother cleaned houses. You have absolutely nothing in common with the people in that ballroom." He gestured broadly toward the party, his voice carrying clearly across the marble acoustics. "These are people who summer in the Hamptons, who have box seats at the opera, who donate millions to charity galas. What could you possibly contribute to their conversations? What experiences could you share that would interest them?" Elena stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that would have been immediately recognizable to any military personnel present. But to James Morrison, she simply looked like a woman taking his verbal abuse without fighting back. "Furthermore," James continued, clearly warming to his theme now that he felt he had the upper hand, "David is finally starting to recover. The last thing he needs is the stress of watching you embarrass yourself, and by extension, embarrass him in front of our family friends." The crowd in the foyer had grown to about 20 people now, forming a loose semicircle around the confrontation. Elena could see a mix of expressions on their faces. Some looked uncomfortable with James's behavior, while others seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. A few were definitely recording with their phones. "I see," Elena said calmly. "So you're saying this is for David's own good?" "Exactly," James exclaimed, seeming relieved that she finally understood. Mother and father have worked for decades to build relationships with the most influential people in Chicago. Tonight's guest list includes 2 federal appeals court judges, the CEO of Morrison Industries' biggest client, and at least 3 congressmen. The last thing we need is David's wife making small talk about, I don't know, whatever it is you people talk about. Elena raised an eyebrow. "You people?" James waved his hand dismissively. "You know what I mean. Military spouses. People who shop at Target and think Olive Garden is fine dining. People who've never been to a real charity gala or understood how business actually works at this level." One of the observing guests, an elderly woman in diamonds, audibly gasped at James's rudeness. Even in Chicago's elite social circles, this level of open condescension was considered poor form. But James was beyond caring about social niceties now. He'd worked himself into the kind of privileged fury that came from having his authority questioned by someone he considered beneath him. "The truth is, Elena, you've been living off David's family name for 8 years. You married up, and everyone knows it. But tonight, surrounded by actual accomplished people, your limitations would be obvious to everyone. Mother is simply trying to spare you that embarrassment." Elena tilted her head slightly, studying James with the same analytical gaze she'd used to assess hostile situations overseas. "And what makes you think I would be embarrassed? What exactly do you know about my limitations?" James laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the marble walls. "Please, you were what, some kind of enlisted soldier? You probably spent your time typing reports or answering phones at some base in Texas. Now you're unemployed, living off David's salary while he fights cancer. You think that qualifies you to hobnob with federal judges and Fortune 500 executives?" The temperature in the foyer seemed to drop several degrees. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Several of the observing guests seemed to sense the change, taking small steps backward without really understanding why. "You seem to have given this a lot of thought," Elena said quietly. "Of course I have," James replied, completely missing the warning signs that any of Elena's former subordinates would have recognized immediately. Someone in this family has to be realistic about these situations. David's too nice to tell you the truth, but I'm not. You're out of your depth here, Elena. Way out of your depth." At that moment, Patricia Morrison herself appeared in the doorway leading from the ballroom, her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her designer gown rustling with each step. She took in the scene with cool blue eyes, showing no surprise at finding Elena confronting her son in the club's entrance hall. "James," Patricia said smoothly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Is there a problem here?" Elena turned to face her mother-in-law, noting how Patricia's gaze swept over her simple black dress with obvious disdain. The older woman's expression made it clear that Elena's presence here was not just unwelcome, it was personally offensive to her. "Mother," James said, some of his earlier confidence returning now that reinforcements had arrived. "I was just explaining to Elena why tonight might not be the best time for her to join the family celebration." Patricia nodded approvingly at her son, then turned her attention to Elena with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Elena, dear, how unexpected to see you here." Patricia Morrison glided across the marble floor with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in her 70 years of life. Her pale blue eyes assessed Elena from head to toe, taking in every detail of her simple dress, her practical shoes, her understated jewelry. The expression on her face suggested she was looking at something distasteful that had been tracked in on someone's shoe. "Elena, dear," Patricia said again, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm surprised you decided to come tonight, especially with David being so unwell. Surely your place is at home, caring for your husband during his difficult time." The crowd of onlookers had grown to nearly 30 people now, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Elena could see phones being raised discreetly, social media posts being prepared. In Chicago's elite circles, drama like this would be dissected and discussed for months. David specifically asked me to represent our family tonight, Elena replied calmly. He was looking forward to hearing about the celebration. Patricia's smile became even more artificial. How thoughtful of him. But you see, tonight's gathering is quite specialized. The conversations tend to focus on topics that require a certain level of education and experience. Federal policy, international business, cultural philanthropy. I'm simply concerned that you might feel left out. James nodded vigorously at his mother's words. Exactly what I was telling her mother. It's really for Elena's own comfort. Elena studied both Morrisons with the same analytical gaze she'd used to assess tribal leaders in Afghanistan. She could see the family resemblance clearly now, the same arrogant assumption that their wealth and social status made them inherently superior to everyone else. I appreciate your concern, Elena said quietly, but I think I can manage a conversation or two. Patricia laughed, a tinkling sound that somehow managed to be both musical and cutting. Oh, my dear girl. I'm sure you could discuss military bases and whatever it is soldiers talk about, but tonight we have Judge Harrison from the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. We have Congressman Williams from the Armed Services Committee. We have the CEO of Northrop Grumman. These are people who deal with matters of national importance. National importance, Elena repeated, her voice remaining steady even as something dangerous flickered in her eyes. Yes, Patricia continued, warming to her theme the same way her son had. These are people who shape policy, who make decisions that affect millions of people. Judge Harrison just ruled on a case involving military procurement contracts. Congressman Williams oversees defense spending. Mr. Richardson from Northrop helps determine our nation's military capabilities. Elena nodded thoughtfully. And you don't think I would have anything meaningful to contribute to those conversations? Well, Patricia said with another of her artificial smiles, what could you possibly know about defense policy or military procurement? You were enlisted personnel, weren't you? I'm sure you did your duty admirably, but these people operate at a completely different level. James jumped in, clearly emboldened by his mother's support. Mother's right, Elena. These aren't conversations about barracks life or following orders. These are strategic discussions about billion-dollar contracts and national security policy. The assembled crowd had grown completely silent now, sensing that something significant was building. Several guests had moved closer, trying to hear every word of this unprecedented public confrontation at the exclusive Riverside Country Club. That's when Elena heard the distinctive sound of tactical boots on marble, a crisp, measured cadence that was unmistakably military. She turned toward the main entrance just as a group of 4 men in dark suits entered the foyer. Their bearing, their synchronized movement, their discreet earpieces, all identified them immediately as federal security personnel. The lead agent, a tall black man with silver hair and the bearing of a career military officer, scanned the room with professional efficiency. His gaze settled on the crowd gathered around Elena, and his expression shifted to one of recognition and concern. "Ma'am," he said, approaching Elena directly while his team automatically positioned themselves around the group. "We weren't expecting you this evening. Is there a security concern we should be aware of?" Patricia and James both stepped backward instinctively, suddenly uncertain about what was happening. The crowd of onlookers grew even quieter, sensing that the dynamic of the situation was about to change dramatically. Elena turned to face the security chief, and for the first time that evening she allowed a slight smile to cross her face. "Good evening, Agent Morrison. No security concerns. I'm just here as a family member tonight." Agent Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "Family member, ma'am? I wasn't aware you had relatives attending this event." "My in-laws are hosting the anniversary celebration," Elena explained, gesturing toward Patricia and James, who were both staring at the exchange with growing confusion. The security chief looked from Elena to the Morrisons and back again, clearly processing this unexpected information. "I see. And there's no official capacity to your presence here tonight?" "None whatsoever," Elena replied. "I'm simply here to celebrate with my husband's family." Agent Morrison nodded, but his professional demeanor remained in place. "Understood, ma'am. However, given the sensitive nature of some of tonight's attendees, I do need to confirm your identity for our records. Elena reached into her purse and withdrew her identification, handing it to the security chief. As he examined it, his expression shifted to one of surprised respect. "Colonel Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent foyer. "I wasn't aware you were attending tonight's event. Should I inform Judge Harrison and Congressman Williams that you're here? I'm sure they'd appreciate the opportunity to speak with you." The effect on the crowd was immediate and electric. Several guests gasped audibly, while others began whispering urgently to each other. Patricia Morrison's face had gone completely white, while James stood frozen with his mouth slightly open. "That won't be necessary, Agent Morrison," Elena replied calmly. "As I said, I'm here purely in a family capacity tonight." But Agent Morrison was already reaching for his radio. "Actually, ma'am, I think you should know. Congressman Williams specifically mentioned hoping to discuss the Afghanistan Reconstruction Oversight Committee with you if the opportunity arose. And Judge Harrison was asking about your testimony in the Meridian defense case." Elena sighed quietly. "Very well. If they specifically requested to speak with me." Agent Morrison spoke briefly into his radio, then turned back to Elena with professional respect. "They'll be right out, Madam Colonel. It's an honor to have you here tonight." As the security team maintained their professional positions around the group, Patricia Morrison finally found her voice. I don't understand. Colonel? What exactly?" Elena turned to face her mother-in-law, and for the first time that evening, her expression carried the full authority of her military rank and experience. "You were saying something about what I might know about defense policy and military procurement, Patricia?" The marble foyer of the Riverside Country Club had fallen into a silence so complete that Elena could hear the distant sounds of the orchestra playing in the ballroom. Patricia Morrison stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, while James had gone completely pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "Colonel?" Patricia finally managed to whisper. But you were enlisted. You were just a regular soldier." Elena's expression remained calm, but there was steel in her voice when she replied, "I was never enlisted, Patricia. I graduated from the Naval Academy with honors, then served 15 years as a Marine Corps officer. I retired last year as a full colonel after commanding a joint task force of over 3,000 personnel across 2 combat theaters." Agent Morrison stepped forward respectfully. "Ma'am, if I may, Colonel Rodriguez led the most successful reconstruction oversight operation in Afghanistan's recent history. Her work saved taxpayers over $2 billion while improving infrastructure delivery by 40%. The crowd of onlookers was growing as word spread through the party. Elena could see more guests filtering out from the ballroom, drawn by the commotion and the presence of federal security. Among them, she recognized several faces from her briefings in Washington, people who definitely knew exactly who she was. "Elena," James stammered, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "I had no idea. David never told us. I mean, we thought—" "You thought what, exactly?" Elena asked quietly, her voice carrying the same authority she'd used to address Joint Chiefs of Staff. "You thought what you wanted to think. You saw a woman with a Hispanic surname from San Antonio and decided you knew everything about my background, my education, and my capabilities." Patricia was frantically trying to process this information. "But if you're really a colonel, why did you retire? Why aren't you still serving?" Elena's expression softened slightly. "Because my husband has cancer, Patricia. Because David needed someone to drive him to chemotherapy appointments and hold his hand during the bad days. Because taking care of the man I love was more important to me than any military career." A murmur rippled through the crowd at this revelation. Several of the female guests exchanged meaningful glances, recognizing the sacrifice Elena had made for her family. At that moment, a distinguished older man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo approached the group. Elena recognized him immediately. Federal Judge Harrison, exactly the man Patricia had mentioned as being too important for Elena to speak with. "Colonel Rodriguez," Judge Harrison said warmly, extending his hand. "What a pleasant surprise to see you here. I was hoping we might have a chance to discuss your testimony in the Meridian defense case. Your analysis of the procurement irregularities was absolutely brilliant. Elena shook his hand professionally. Thank you, Your Honor, though I'm here tonight purely as a family member. These are my in-laws, Richard and Patricia Morrison. Judge Harrison turned to the Morrisons with polite interest. How wonderful! You must be so proud of Elena's service to our country. Her work on military procurement reform has been invaluable to the federal court system. Patricia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. James was staring at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. Congressman Williams appeared next, followed by two more federal officials Elena recognized from her Pentagon briefings. Each greeted her with obvious respect and familiarity, asking about David's health and expressing hope that she might consider returning to government service once he recovered. Actually, Congressman Williams said, I've been meaning to call you. The Armed Services Committee is looking for someone to head up our new Oversight Subcommittee. The position would be perfect for someone with your experience. Agent Morrison approached Elena again, this time with even more deference than before. Ma'am, I just received word from Washington. General Patterson wanted me to pass along his personal regards, and to inform you that the Pentagon position is still available if you decide to return to service. Elena nodded graciously. Please give the General my thanks. I'll certainly consider it once my husband's treatment is complete. The security chief hesitated for a moment, then spoke more quietly. Ma'am, there's actually something else. Given your security clearance level and the presence of several high-value targets tonight, I'm required to inform you that you've been designated as the senior military authority on site. In effect, you have operational command of tonight's security detail. Elena raised an eyebrow. Operational command? Yes, ma'am. In the event of any security incident, you would be the ranking military officer responsible for coordinating response efforts. The designation is automatic given your clearance level and command experience. Agent Morrison then did something that sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. He straightened to attention and addressed Elena with formal military protocol. Madam President, he said clearly, using the traditional address for the senior officer in command. Do you have any specific security directives for this evening's event? The effect was immediate and devastating. Patricia Morrison actually stumbled backward, catching herself against a marble pillar. James's face had gone from pale to green, and several of the elite guests were staring at Elena with new understanding and respect. No additional directives, Agent Morrison, Elena replied calmly. Please continue with standard protocols. As the crowd began to disperse, many guests approaching Elena to introduce themselves and express their admiration for her service. Patricia Morrison found herself standing alone with her son, both of them looking utterly shell-shocked. Elena approached them one final time, her voice quiet but firm. Patricia, James, I want you to understand something. When David recovers from his cancer, and he will recover, we'll still be family, but we'll never again tolerate being treated as second-class citizens because of your assumptions about our background or worth. She paused, letting that sink in. David loves you both, despite how you've treated his wife tonight. For his sake, I'm willing to pretend this conversation never happened. But if you ever again try to exclude me from family events or suggest that I'm not sophisticated enough for your social circle, I'll make sure everyone in your precious high society knows exactly how you behaved tonight. Patricia nodded mutely, tears beginning to form in her eyes as the full weight of her mistake became clear. Now, Elena continued, I'm going to go into that ballroom and celebrate your anniversary, just as David hoped I would. I suggest you both take a few minutes to compose yourselves before joining your own party. As Elena walked toward the ballroom entrance, Agent Morrison fell into step beside her. Ma'am, would you like us to maintain a discreet presence near your location this evening? Elena smiled for the first time all night. That won't be necessary, Agent Morrison. I think I can handle a few conversations about federal policy and military procurement. Behind them, Patricia Morrison was still staring after Elena, finally understanding that she had just tried to humiliate one of the most accomplished people in the room, and that her son's wife had handled the situation with more grace and dignity than Patricia herself had shown in 70 years of life. 3 hours later, Elena Rodriguez stood on the country club's terrace overlooking Lake Michigan, a glass of champagne in her hand and the soft sounds of the anniversary celebration drifting through the French doors behind her. The evening had transformed completely from the humiliating confrontation in the foyer to what could only be described as a triumph. Word of the dramatic scene had spread through the party like wildfire. Elena found herself surrounded by some of the most influential people in Chicago, all eager to speak with the woman they now knew was Colonel Elena Rodriguez, the same officer whose military innovations and oversight work had been featured in defense journals and congressional testimony. Judge Harrison had spent 20 minutes discussing the legal implications of military procurement reform, while Congressman Williams had practically begged her to consider the oversight subcommittee position. The CEO of Northrop Grumman, the very man Patricia had mentioned as being too important for Elena to speak with, had exchanged business cards and invited her to speak at their annual Defense Contractors Conference. But perhaps the most satisfying moment had come when Mrs. Catherine Whitmore, the doyenne of Chicago high society and the most influential woman in Patricia Morrison's social circle, had approached Elena near the dessert table. "My dear," Mrs. Whitmore had said in her refined voice that carried across half the ballroom, "I must apologize on behalf of our entire social community. What Patricia and James did tonight was absolutely unconscionable. To treat a decorated veteran, a woman who sacrificed her career for family in such a manner, well, it reflects very poorly on all of us." Elena had handled the moment with characteristic grace, but the message was clear. Patricia Morrison had committed a social suicide that would have lasting consequences in the circles she valued most. Now, as Elena enjoyed the peaceful evening air, she pulled out her phone to call David. It was nearly 11 p.m., but she knew he'd be awake, probably reading in bed and wondering how the evening had gone. "Am I amor?" David's voice came through the phone, weak but warm. "How was the party? Did my parents behave themselves?" Elena smiled, looking out over the moonlit lake. "It was eventful. Let's just say your family learned some interesting things about your wife tonight." "Oh no?" David groaned. "What did they do? Please tell me my mother didn't make one of her comments about your background." "Actually, she did. Several of them, in fact. Along with your brother." Elena's voice remained light, but David knew her well enough to detect the steel underneath. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I should have warned them, should have told them more about your military service. I never thought it mattered to them who you were before we met." "David, sweetheart, it's not your job to educate your family about respecting other people. That's something they should have learned decades ago." Elena paused, watching a yacht's lights move slowly across the water. "But I think they understand now. What happened? And please don't tell me you had to pull rank on federal judges at my parents' anniversary party." Elena laughed. "Well, funny you should mention that." She spent the next 15 minutes giving David a detailed account of the evening's events. From James's initial confrontation to Agent Morrison's Madam President address to the subsequent parade of federal officials seeking her attention. David was quiet for a long moment after she finished. "I can't believe they tried to ban you from the party, my own parents. Elena, I am so incredibly sorry." "Don't apologize for them, David. Their behavior tonight said everything about who they are and nothing about who we are." Elena's voice was firm but gentle. "But I want you to know, I handled it exactly the way you would have wanted me to. With dignity, with strength, but without burning any bridges that might hurt our family. That's my girl," David said, his voice full of pride and love. "I knew you could handle anything they threw at you. I just hate that you had to." Through the terrace doors, Elena could see the party winding down. Patricia Morrison was nowhere to be seen. According to several guests, she had retreated to the ladies' room shortly after the security chief's Madam President address and hadn't been seen since. James had managed to stay for the remainder of the party, but Elena had noticed him drinking heavily and avoiding eye contact with anyone who had witnessed his earlier behavior. "There's something else," Elena said into the phone. "Congressman Williams offered me a position heading up a new oversight subcommittee. And General Patterson wants me to consider returning to the Pentagon once your treatment is complete." David was quiet for another moment. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them I'd consider it once my husband is healthy again. Once we're sure the cancer is gone for good and you're back to your old self." "Elena," David's voice was soft. "You don't have to wait for me to be completely recovered. If these are opportunities you want." "David Rodriguez," Elena interrupted firmly. "I didn't sacrifice my military career just to abandon you the moment some interesting job offers came along. We're in this together, remember? In sickness and in health." "I love you so much," David whispered, "and I'm so proud of you. Not just for tonight, but for everything. For giving up your career to take care of me. For handling my family's nonsense with such grace. For being the strongest person I know." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes for the first time that evening. "I love you too. And David, your parents are going to be calling you tomorrow. They're going to want to apologize and make things right. Are you okay with that?" "I'm okay with whatever helps our family heal. But they need to understand that things have changed. They can't go back to treating us like charity cases or social embarrassments. We're equals in this family now, or we're nothing at all." As Elena ended the call and prepared to return to the party for the final toasts, she reflected on how dramatically the evening had evolved. She'd arrived at the Riverside Country Club as an unwelcome outsider, banned from her own family's celebration. She was leaving as one of the most respected people in the room, with job offers from the highest levels of government and the social humiliation of her in-laws complete and public. But more importantly, she'd proven something to herself and to David's family. That respect wasn't something you inherited or bought. It was something you earned through your actions, your character, and your willingness to stand up for what was right. Agent Morrison approached her on the terrace. "Ma'am, we're beginning to wrap up security operations for the evening. It's been an honor serving under your command tonight." Elena smiled. "The honor was mine, Agent Morrison. Thank you for your professionalism." As the security chief walked away, Elena took one last look at the lake, then straightened her shoulders and prepared to return to the party. Tomorrow, she would drive home to David and continue their fight against his cancer. Next week, she'd probably have to navigate some awkward family phone calls as the Morrisons tried to repair the damage they'd done to their relationship. But tonight, she was going to enjoy the remainder of her in-laws' anniversary party as exactly what she'd always been: a decorated veteran, a loving wife, and a woman who'd earned her place at any table she chose to sit at. The sounds of laughter and conversation welcomed her back as she stepped through the French doors, ready to finish the evening on her own terms. The first video appeared on social media at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. Shot by Amanda Chen, a federal prosecutor who had been among the witnesses in the country club foyer, the 30-second clip captured the exact moment Agent Morrison addressed Elena as, quote, "Madam President," and the subsequent shocked expressions on Patricia and James Morrison's faces. By 8 a.m., the video had been shared over 50,000 times across various platforms, with the hashtag Madam President trending in 3 major cities. The caption read, "When entitled rich people try to humiliate a veteran at their own family party, but she outranks everyone in the room. Watch their faces when they realize their mistake." Elena was making coffee in her kitchen when her phone started buzzing with notifications. She and David had driven home from Chicago the night before, arriving at their modest suburban house in Milwaukee around 2 a.m. David had fallen asleep almost immediately, exhausted from staying up late to hear about the party, but Elena had lain awake for hours processing the evening's events. "David," she called softly toward the bedroom, "you need to see this." David appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing his favorite Wisconsin Badgers t-shirt, looking pale but alert. The chemotherapy had taken a toll on his once athletic frame, but his eyes still sparkled with the same humor and intelligence that had attracted Elena 15 years ago. "What's wrong?" he asked, noting the expression on her face. Elena handed him her phone, showing the viral video. They watched together as the drama unfolded in compressed form. James's condescending dismissal, Patricia's lecture about sophistication, and then the moment when everything changed. "Oh my God," David breathed, watching his mother's face when the security chief revealed Elena's true identity. "This has been shared how many times?" 53,000 and counting, Elena said, refreshing the page. "And that's just one video. There are at least 6 different angles posted by different people." David sank into a kitchen chair, still staring at the phone. My mother is going to be devastated. Her entire social world is probably watching this right now. Elena poured him a cup of coffee, adding the 3 sugars he'd needed since starting chemo. I didn't ask for this to go viral, David. I handled the situation as quietly as I could. But when people behave badly in public, sometimes there are public consequences. Before David could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number. Should I answer it? He asked. Elena nodded. Might as well get this over with. David put the phone on speaker. Patricia Morrison's voice came through, shaky and desperate. David, sweetheart, have you been online this morning? Yes, Mom. Elena and I just watched the video. Videos, plural, Patricia corrected miserably. There are several of them. And the comments. Oh, David, the comments are horrible. People are calling me a classist snob, a terrible mother-in-law, a social climber who got her comeuppance. Elena noticed that Patricia still hadn't actually apologized for her behavior, only complained about the consequences. Mrs. Chen posted on her Facebook that I tried to ban a decorated war hero from a family event, Patricia continued. And Judge Harrison's wife shared it with a comment about how military families deserve better treatment. David, my garden club is probably seeing this right now. David looked at Elena with a mixture of sympathy and exhaustion. Mom, maybe this is a good time to think about why people are reacting this way. But David, I didn't know. How was I supposed to know Elena was some high-ranking military officer? She never told us about any of this. Elena took the phone gently from David's hands. Patricia, I've been married to your son for 8 years. In that time, have you ever once asked me about my military service? Have you ever shown any interest in my background or my career? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. You assumed, Elena continued calmly, that because I grew up working class and have a Hispanic surname, I couldn't possibly be educated or accomplished. You never bothered to learn who I actually was because you'd already decided who you thought I was. I suppose I never meant to. Patricia, I don't need you to grovel or make excuses. What I need is for you to understand that this viral moment happened because you publicly humiliated someone at a family event based on prejudiced assumptions. The internet is reacting because millions of people have experienced exactly what I experienced last night. David was watching his wife with obvious admiration, seeing again the officer who had commanded respect from generals and diplomats. The comments aren't horrible because people are mean, Elena continued. They're honest because your behavior was horrible. People are sharing this video because they recognize the injustice of what happened. And they're celebrating the fact that this time, the person being judged unfairly turned out to have the credentials to embarrass those doing the judging. Another long silence from Patricia's end. What can I do? She finally asked in a small voice. You can start by apologizing. Really apologizing, not just expressing regret that you got caught, or that there are consequences. And you can think about how you've treated other people over the years based on the same kinds of assumptions you made about me. Elena could hear Patricia crying softly on the other end of the line. But David, Patricia said through her tears, what about our reputation? What about our standing in the community? Some of these comments are saying we're terrible people. Elena looked at David, who was shaking his head in amazement at his mother's priorities. Mom, David said firmly, maybe worry less about your reputation and more about whether you've been treating people with basic human dignity. Elena didn't create this situation. You did. After Patricia hung up to deal with the crisis, as she put it, Elena and David sat together at their kitchen table, watching the viral phenomenon unfold. News outlets were picking up the story, framing it as an example of military families facing discrimination and the dangers of making assumptions based on class and ethnicity. A local Milwaukee news station called requesting an interview. 3 national military advocacy organizations wanted to feature Elena's story in their newsletters. Someone had even created a meme using Patricia's shocked expression with the caption, "When you try to exclude someone but they outrank your entire social circle." You know what the strangest part is? Elena said, scrolling through hundreds of supportive comments from fellow veterans and military spouses. I went to that party just wanting to represent our family with dignity. I never intended to make a statement about class prejudice or military respect. David reached across the table to take her hand. But maybe that's exactly why this is resonating with so many people. You didn't set out to humiliate my family or create viral content. You just stood up for yourself with grace when they tried to tear you down. Elena's phone rang again. This time it was Agent Morrison from the security detail. Ma'am, I wanted to inform you that several media outlets have contacted our office requesting statements about last night's incident. We've declined all interviews, but I thought you should know that the story is gaining significant national attention. I appreciate that, Agent Morrison. I have no intention of speaking to the media about a private family matter. Understood, ma'am. However, I did want you to know that General Patterson has seen the coverage and asked me to reiterate his invitation for you to return to government service. He was quite impressed with how you handled the situation. After Elena hung up, she and David looked at each other across their modest kitchen table. A far cry from the crystal and silver of the Riverside Country Club, but infinitely more comfortable. So, David said with a weak but genuine smile, my wife is internet famous for putting my snobbish family in their place. I have to admit, there are worse ways to go viral. Elena laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Just promise me that when you're feeling better, we'll stick to much smaller, much quieter family gatherings. Deal, David said. Although I have a feeling future family events are going to be much more respectful affairs. 3 days after the Riverside Country Club incident, Elena was preparing David's morning medications when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. The caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. area code. Colonel Rodriguez? The voice was crisp, professional, and unmistakably military. This is General Patricia Hawkins from the Pentagon. I hope I'm not calling too early. Elena straightened instinctively, even though she was standing alone in her kitchen wearing pajamas and a bathrobe. Good morning, General. Not at all. How can I help you? Actually, Colonel, I'm calling to see how we can help you. I'm sure you're aware that footage from Saturday evening has gained considerable attention, but what you might not know is that it sparked some very interesting conversations here in Washington. Elena glanced toward the bedroom where David was still sleeping, then walked out to their small patio for privacy. I'm listening, ma'am. The video has been viewed over 2 million times now, and it's generated significant discussion about how we treat military families and veterans transitioning to civilian life. The Secretary of Defense has asked me to personally reach out to discuss some opportunities that might interest you. Elena sat down in one of their lawn chairs, watching the morning sun filter through the oak trees in their backyard. General, I appreciate the interest, but as I mentioned to Congressman Williams, my husband is currently undergoing cancer treatment. My priority has to be his recovery. Of course, and that loyalty is exactly why you've caught the attention of senior leadership. Colonel, may I speak candidly? Please do, ma'am. Your service record was already exemplary, but your handling of Saturday's situation demonstrated exactly the kind of character and judgment we need in senior positions. You faced personal attack with dignity, you revealed your credentials only when necessary, and you maintained family relationships despite provocation. That's leadership, Colonel. Elena felt a flutter of excitement despite herself. What kind of opportunities are we discussing? Multiple options. The Oversight Subcommittee position Congressman Williams mentioned is still available. Additionally, the Secretary is considering creating a new role, Director of Military Family Advocacy, specifically focused on supporting military spouses and families during career transitions. The position would be civilian, which means more flexibility for family needs. Elena's mind raced. A position created specifically for her, focused on issues she'd experienced firsthand? That's very interesting, General. There's more. The video has prompted Senator Martinez to introduce legislation expanding healthcare benefits for military families dealing with serious illnesses. She'd like you to testify before the Armed Services Committee about the challenges military families face when choosing between career and caregiving. Before Elena could respond, she heard David calling her name from inside the house. General, could I call you back this afternoon? My husband needs his medication. Of course. But Colonel, think seriously about these opportunities. Your story has resonated with millions of people because it represents something important about service, sacrifice, and respect. We have a chance to turn that viral moment into real policy change. Elena found David sitting on the edge of their bed, looking pale but alert. "Who was that?" he asked, accepting the pills and water she offered. "General Hawkins from the Pentagon. Apparently our viral fame has reached the highest levels of military leadership." David raised an eyebrow. "And?" Elena sat beside him on the bed, explaining the conversation while he took his medications. When she finished, David was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, these sound like incredible opportunities, the kind of positions that could help thousands of military families." "David, we agreed. We agreed that you'd consider returning to service once I was healthy, but this is different. These aren't just jobs, they're chances to make policy that could help people like us." Elena studied her husband's face, seeing the determination there despite his physical weakness. "The treatment schedule alone would make it impossible. You have appointments 3 times a week, and my sister lives 20 minutes away and has been begging to help more. My parents, despite their recent humiliation, would probably climb over themselves to assist with my care if it meant supporting your career." Elena couldn't help but smile at that. "Your parents are probably still hiding under their beds after the internet discovered their behavior." "Actually," David said, pulling out his phone, "James sent me this morning." He showed her a screenshot of a Facebook post from James Morrison. It was a public apology, posted on his professional page where his business colleagues would see it. "I want to publicly apologize for my behavior at my parents' anniversary celebration. I made unfounded assumptions about a family member based on prejudice and ignorance." Colonel Elena Rodriguez is a decorated veteran who sacrificed her military career to care for her family. She deserves respect, not the treatment she received from me. I'm committed to examining my own biases and doing better. Elena stared at the post. "He actually posted this publicly?" "This morning. Apparently his business partners saw the viral videos and had some very pointed conversations with him about the company's reputation and values." Elena's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Colonel Rodriguez, this is Catherine Whitmore. I'm organizing a fundraiser for military family medical expenses. Would you consider being our keynote speaker?" The response to Saturday's events has been overwhelming. "David, look at this." Elena showed him the text. David read it and smiled. "Elena, do you see what's happening? Your story isn't just going viral for entertainment. It's starting conversations about real issues. Military families struggling with medical costs, veterans facing employment discrimination, the assumptions people make about service members." Elena's phone rang again. This time it was her former commanding officer, General Patterson. "Elena," his familiar voice came through the speaker, "I've been fielding calls about you all morning. The Marine Corps wants to feature your story in their family support materials. The Veterans Administration wants to discuss your insights on family caregiving challenges. And apparently, 3 different universities want to offer you honorary positions." "General, this is all very flattering, but..." "Elena, stop. I know your husband is sick. I know you're focused on his care. But what if I told you that the Pentagon position General Hawkins discussed could be done largely remotely? What if the testimony Senator Martinez wants could help pass legislation that would prevent other military families from facing the same financial stress you're dealing with?" Elena looked at David, who was listening intently despite his fatigue. "Colonel," General Patterson continued, "your viral moment happened because you handled an impossible situation with dignity and strength. But the reason it's resonating so broadly is because it represents something larger. The sacrifices military families make, the assumptions they face, the respect they deserve. You have a platform now that most veterans never get. The question is what you want to do with it." After Elena hung up, she and David sat together in their bedroom, surrounded by pill bottles and medical equipment, but also by possibilities neither had imagined 3 days earlier. "What do you think?" Elena asked quietly. David took her hand with what strength he had. "I think Patricia Morrison trying to ban you from a party might have been the best thing that ever happened to military family advocacy." Elena laughed despite herself. "That's not exactly how I plan to launch a second career." "The best opportunities rarely come the way we plan them," David said. But Elena, if there's a chance your experience could help other families avoid choosing between career and caregiving the way we did, isn't that worth considering? Elena looked around their modest bedroom, then at her husband's determined face, and realized that sometimes the most unexpected detours could lead to the most important destinations. 2 weeks after the viral incident, Elena found herself sitting in the waiting room of the Milwaukee Cancer Center, laptop open, participating in a video conference with the Pentagon while David received his chemotherapy treatment. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was discussing military family policy from a cancer center, the very place that represented why she'd left military service in the first place. Colonel Rodriguez, General Hawkins's voice came through her earbuds. The response to the preliminary announcement has been extraordinary. We've received over 3,000 emails from military families sharing their own stories about choosing between career and caregiving. Elena glanced toward the treatment room where David was hooked up to his IV, giving her a thumbs up through the window. They'd worked out a system. She could take calls and meetings during his 3-hour sessions, turning his treatment time into productive work time. That's both encouraging and heartbreaking, General, Elena replied quietly. 3,000 families shouldn't have to make that choice. Exactly why we need the Military Family Advocacy Director position filled immediately. The Secretary wants to fast-track this initiative while we have congressional attention and public support. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source. Patricia Morrison. Elena, I saw the news coverage about your Pentagon position. Richard and I would like to help with David's care, so you can pursue this opportunity. We owe you that much and more. Elena stared at the text, remembering the woman who had tried to ban her from a family party just 2 weeks earlier. David's cancer diagnosis had a way of clarifying priorities, but apparently so did public humiliation and viral accountability. Colonel? General Hawkins was still on the line. Are you there? Yes, ma'am. Sorry, just coordinating David's care schedule. General, I'm interested in the position, but I need absolute flexibility for medical appointments and family emergencies. Done. Elena, can I be frank? This viral moment has given us political capital we've never had before. Senator Martinez's military family health care bill has bipartisan support specifically because your story put a human face on these issues. But that window won't stay open forever. After ending the Pentagon call, Elena walked into David's treatment room. He was pale, but alert, reading on his tablet while the chemotherapy drugs dripped into his system. How did it go? He asked, looking up as she settled into the chair beside his treatment bed. They want an answer by Friday. And David, your mother just texted offering to help with your care so I can take the position. David's eyebrows shot up. My mother? The same woman who tried to ban you from their anniversary party? Apparently, viral humiliation and business pressure have a clarifying effect on priorities. David was quiet for a moment, watching the IV drip. Elena, I've been thinking about something. This whole situation started because my family made assumptions about you based on prejudice. But maybe I made assumptions too. What do you mean? I assumed that leaving military service was the only way you could take care of me. I never considered that there might be ways to do both, or that your professional experience might actually be more valuable now than ever. Elena took his hand, careful not to jostle the IV line. David, I chose to leave. No one forced me. But what if you didn't have to choose? What if the real solution isn't women leaving careers to provide care, but creating systems that support both? What if your new position could help build those systems for other families? Before Elena could respond, Dr. Sarah Kim, David's oncologist, knocked on the doorframe. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to check on how you're both handling everything. I saw the news coverage about the Pentagon position. Dr. Kim had been treating David for 6 months, and Elena had come to respect her direct, no-nonsense approach to both medicine and life. We're still deciding, Elena said. It's a great opportunity, but the timing is complicated. Dr. Kim pulled up a chair. Can I share something from a medical perspective? I've been treating cancer patients for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of caregiving situations. The families that do best are the ones where both partners maintain their sense of purpose and identity. She looked directly at Elena. Sacrificing your entire career and identity to become a full-time caregiver can actually increase stress for both partners. David needs care, absolutely, but he also needs to see you thriving, not just surviving." David nodded weakly. "That's exactly what I've been trying to tell her." Additionally, Dr. Kim continued, "David's prognosis is excellent. His response to treatment has been better than expected. By our next evaluation, I expect to reduce his treatment schedule significantly." Elena felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized had been tight. "Reduce how much?" "Possibly from 3 sessions a week to once a month for maintenance. The acute phase of treatment should be ending soon." Elena's phone rang. Catherine Whitmore's name appeared on the screen. "Elena, dear." Mrs. Whitmore's refined voice carried clearly through the treatment room. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I wanted to update you on the fundraiser response." "Not at all, Mrs. Whitmore. What's the news?" "Well, my dear, we've raised over $200,000 for military family medical expenses in just 2 weeks. The response has been absolutely overwhelming. People keep saying your story inspired them to contribute." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. $200,000? And that's just the beginning. 3 major corporations have committed to matching funds. And we have interest from a national foundation that wants to establish an ongoing military family medical support program. After Mrs. Whitmore hung up, Elena sat in stunned silence. David reached for her hand again. "Elena, do you see what's happening? Your story isn't just going viral anymore. It's creating real change. The fundraiser, the Pentagon position, the legislation. You have a chance to build systems that could help thousands of families avoid the choices we've had to make." Dr. Kim nodded approvingly. "From a medical perspective, I think having a sense of purpose and meaningful work would actually benefit both of you during David's recovery." Elena's phone buzzed with another text, this time from James Morrison. "Elena, I've been following the news about your Pentagon opportunity. My company has connections with several veteran support organizations. I'd like to help promote your military family advocacy work. It's the least I can do." Elena showed the text to David, who shook his head in amazement. 2 weeks ago, he was telling you that you weren't sophisticated enough to be around his business associates. Now he wants to promote your career. "People can change," Elena said thoughtfully. "Sometimes they just need the right motivation." Dr. Kim stood to check David's IV levels. "So what are you leaning toward?" Elena looked at her husband, pale but determined in his treatment chair, fighting cancer with the same quiet strength he'd shown throughout their marriage. She thought about the 3,000 military families who had written to share their stories, about the legislation that could prevent future families from facing impossible choices, about the fundraising that was already helping people she'd never met. "I think," Elena said slowly, "I'm going to call General Hawkins and accept the position." David smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in weeks. "That's my girl, the one who never backs down from a mission." "But David, this means," he interrupted gently, "that Patricia Morrison's attempt to humiliate you at a party is going to end up helping thousands of military families. That's not just poetic justice. That's a pretty perfect mission accomplishment." Elena laughed, feeling lighter than she had since David's diagnosis. Sometimes the most unexpected challenges led to the most important opportunities. And sometimes, standing up for yourself in a marble foyer could end up changing policy in Washington, D.C. 6 weeks after the Riverside Country Club incident, Elena Rodriguez stood before the Senate Armed Services Committee in a navy blue suit, her military ribbons pinned to her lapel, about to give testimony that would be broadcast live on C-SPAN and streamed to millions online. The same viral video that had started as family drama was now driving national policy discussions. Hasi's idea. Senator Maria Martinez, the committee chair, gavelled the session to order. Today, we're hearing testimony on SB 2847, the Military Family Healthcare Support Act. Our first witness is Colonel Elena Rodriguez, newly appointed Director of Military Family Advocacy at the Pentagon. Elena adjusted her microphone, looking out at the packed hearing room. In the gallery, she could see David, weak but determined to attend, sitting next to Patricia and Richard Morrison. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the woman they'd tried to ban from a family party was now testifying before the United States Senate. Senator Martinez, Distinguished members of the committee, Elena began, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had served her in military briefings. I appear before you today not just as a Pentagon official, but as a military spouse who faced the impossible choice between career and caregiving that thousands of families confront every year. She paused, making eye contact with each committee member. 6 weeks ago, a personal family incident became public in a way I never intended. But that moment of unplanned visibility has given us an unprecedented opportunity to address systemic issues that military families have struggled with in silence for decades. Senator Williams, the ranking Republican member, leaned forward. Colonel Rodriguez, can you quantify the scope of this problem for the committee? Yes, sir. In the 6 weeks since my appointment, our office has received over 12,000 contacts from military families sharing their stories. 63% report that at least one spouse has left or significantly reduced their career to provide family caregiving. The average financial impact is $42,000 per year in lost income. Elena clicked to her next slide, showing a map of the United States dotted with red markers. Each of these markers represents a military family that has contacted our office. The geographic distribution shows this isn't a regional issue. It's a national crisis affecting military readiness and family stability across all service branches. Senator Thompson from Texas raised his hand. Colonel, your own situation became public through unusual circumstances. Can you walk us through how your experience illustrates these broader issues? Elena had prepared for this question, knowing that her viral moment would inevitably be part of the testimony. Senator, my husband David was diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma while I was serving as a colonel in the Marine Corps. The treatment schedule required 3 appointments per week, each lasting several hours. My military duties included overseas travel and extended deployments that would have been impossible to maintain. She looked toward David in the gallery, drawing strength from his encouraging nod. I made the decision to retire early and forfeit my pension benefits to ensure David received the care he needed. At the time, it felt like the only option available to us. And the financial impact? Senator Martinez prompted. Significant. We lost my military salary of $93,000 annually, plus future pension benefits valued at approximately $1.2 million over the course of my expected retirement. We've depleted our savings paying for medical expenses not covered by military health care. Senator Williams consulted his notes. But Colonel, wasn't your husband's cancer treatment covered by military benefits? The treatment itself, yes, sir, but not the associated costs. Lost wages when David couldn't work, travel expenses for specialist appointments, adaptive equipment for our home, extended care services. These, quote, peripheral costs often exceed the direct medical expenses. Elena advanced to her next slide, showing testimonials from military families. This pattern repeats across thousands of families. A Navy wife in San Diego left her career as a civil engineer when her daughter was diagnosed with autism and needed full-time advocacy. An Army husband in North Carolina gave up his position as a high school principal when his wife's PTSD required intensive outpatient treatment. Senator Davis from Virginia, herself a veteran, leaned into her microphone. Colonel Rodriguez, what specific solutions does the Military Family Healthcare Support Act propose? Thank you, Senator. The legislation addresses 3 critical areas. First, it expands military healthcare coverage to include caregiving support services, respite care, and family counseling. Second, it creates a military family emergency fund, providing bridge financing for medical-related expenses. Third, it establishes flexible work arrangements for military spouses facing family health crises. Elena paused, looking directly at the C-SPAN camera. But perhaps most importantly, it changes the culture. It recognizes that supporting military families isn't just the right thing to do, it's essential for military readiness. When we force families to choose between service and caregiving, we lose talented officers and create unnecessary financial hardship for those who've already sacrificed so much. Senator Williams shuffled his papers. Colonel, I have to ask about the unusual circumstances that brought this issue to public attention. Some critics have suggested that your viral moment was orchestrated to generate sympathy for this legislation. Elena felt a flash of the same controlled anger she'd experienced in the country club foyer, but her response was measured and professional. Senator, I can assure you that being publicly humiliated by my in-laws at their anniversary party was not part of any legislative strategy. Quiet laughter rippled through the hearing room. The viral video happened because a private family conflict became public through social media, but that accidental visibility revealed something important. Millions of Americans recognized the injustice of judging military families based on assumptions about their background or circumstances. Elena clicked to her final slide, showing the fundraising results. In 6 weeks, private donations inspired by this incident have raised over $400,000 for military family medical expenses. 3 major corporations have established ongoing military family support programs. 2 universities have created scholarship funds specifically for military children affected by family health crises. She looked back toward David, then directly at Senator Williams. So while the viral moment was unplanned and unwelcome, the response has demonstrated that the American people support military families and want systemic solutions to these challenges. Senator Martinez nodded approvingly. Colonel Rodriguez, what would you say to critics who argue that military families should simply accept these sacrifices as part of service? Elena straightened, her voice carrying 15 years of military command authority. Senator, I would say that there's a difference between sacrifice and abandonment. Military families are prepared to sacrifice for their country. Deployments, relocations, dangerous assignments. But we shouldn't have to sacrifice basic healthcare support or career stability for medical emergencies that could happen to any family. She paused, making sure her words carried clearly through the hearing room and across the internet stream. When we tell military families that choosing between career and caregiving is just part of service, we're not building stronger military families. We're driving good people away from military service entirely. The hearing room was completely silent except for the soft clicking of cameras and keyboards. The Military Family Healthcare Support Act isn't asking for special treatment, Elena continued. It's asking for basic support that recognizes the reality of military life and the value of military families. If we can spend billions on equipment and technology, surely we can invest in the families who serve alongside our military members. Senator Martinez looked down the panel. Any other questions for Colonel Rodriguez? When no hands were raised, Senator Martinez smiled. Colonel, thank you for your testimony and for your service to our country. Your personal experience and professional expertise have been invaluable to this committee's understanding of these issues. As Elena gathered her materials, she could see David giving her a weak but proud thumbs up from the gallery. Patricia Morrison was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Richard was applauding along with most of the hearing room. Later, as they left the Capitol building, David took Elena's arm for support. So, he said with a tired but genuine smile, how does it feel to go from band family member to congressional witness in 6 weeks? Elena laughed, looking back at the dome of the Capitol. Like sometimes, the worst moments in your life can lead to the most important work you'll ever do. 1 year after the Riverside Country Club incident, Elena Rodriguez stood at the podium of the same ballroom where she'd once been banned, but this time as the keynote speaker for the Chicago Military Family Foundation's inaugural fundraising gala. The irony was delicious, but more importantly, the event represented something far greater than personal vindication. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena began, looking out at an audience of 800 guests, including many of the same people who had witnessed her humiliation 12 months earlier. A year ago, I stood in the foyer of this very building having a family disagreement that I never intended to become public. Tonight, that moment has helped us raise over $3 million for military families facing medical crises. The applause was thunderous, led by David, who was sitting at the head table looking healthier than he had in 2 years. His last scan had shown no evidence of cancer, and his oncologist had officially declared him in remission. Beside him sat Patricia and Richard Morrison, who had become 2 of the Foundation's most dedicated volunteers. The Military Family Healthcare Support Act passed the Senate by a vote of 78 to 22, Elena continued, and was signed into law by the president 3 months ago. But more importantly, we've already seen its impact. In the past 6 months, over 2,400 military families have received emergency medical funding. 57 military spouses have been able to maintain their careers while providing family care through our new flexible work programs. Elena clicked to her next slide, showing photos of military families who had been helped by the legislation. This is Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, who was able to keep her position as a federal prosecutor while caring for her husband's traumatic brain injury. This is Captain David Kim, who received funding for his daughter's autism therapy while maintaining his deployment schedule. These families no longer have to choose between service and caregiving. In the audience, Catherine Whitmore dabbed at her eyes with an elegant handkerchief. She had become the foundation's board chair, and Elena's unlikely but fierce ally. Beside her sat Judge Harrison and Congressman Williams, both of whom had become champions of military family issues. Elena advanced to her final slide, which showed a simple before and after comparison. 1 year ago, the average military family facing a health crisis lost $47,000 in income annually. Today, with the new support systems in place, that number has dropped to $8,000. We haven't eliminated the financial impact of medical emergencies, but we've made them survivable. The audience erupted in applause again, but Elena held up her hand for quiet. But perhaps the most important change isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in dignity. Military families no longer have to apologize for needing support during health crises. We've changed the conversation from, "Why can't you handle this on your own?" to, "How can we help you serve your family and your country?" Elena paused, looking directly at Patricia Morrison, who was wiping away tears. The older woman had undergone her own transformation over the past year, volunteering at the VA hospital and establishing a scholarship fund for military children. Her public apology and subsequent advocacy work had actually enhanced her standing in Chicago society, teaching her that true respect came from service, not status. "I want to tell you about one more transformation," Elena said, her voice softening. "My mother-in-law, Patricia Morrison, once told me that I didn't have anything meaningful to contribute to conversations with federal judges and Fortune 500 executives. She was wrong about that, but she was right about one thing. Those conversations do matter. When people in positions of power and influence decide to care about military families, real change happens." Patricia stood up from her seat, tears streaming down her face, and began applauding. The gesture prompted a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. When the audience finally settled, Elena continued. "Patricia Morrison is now one of our most effective advocates. She uses her connections and her social influence to promote military family causes. She's proven that people can change, that privilege can be redirected towards service, and that sometimes our worst moments can lead to our most important work." After the formal program ended, Elena found herself on the same terrace where she had made her phone call to David a year earlier. This time, she wasn't alone. David joined her, along with Patricia and Richard. "Elena," Patricia said quietly, "I need to tell you something I should have said a year ago. I was wrong about everything. Not just about your background or your qualifications, but about what really matters. Watching you turn that horrible evening into something that's helped thousands of families, it's taught me more about character and purpose than 70 years of high society events." Richard nodded, looking older but wiser than he had the previous year. "We raised James to believe that success was measured by wealth and social status. But you've shown us that real success is measured by service and impact. I'm proud to call you my daughter-in-law." David, looking healthy and strong for the first time since his diagnosis, put his arm around Elena. "You know what I love most about this whole story? It started with my family trying to exclude you from a celebration, and it ended with you being celebrated by the entire country." Elena laughed, looking out over Lake Michigan. "I prefer the version where it started with a family learning to understand each other and ended with systematic change for military families." The viral video was just the catalyst. Patricia stepped forward, holding a wrapped gift. "Elena, Richard and I wanted to give you something." Elena unwrapped the package to reveal a framed photo from the congressional hearing, showing her at the witness table with the caption, "Colonel Elena Rodriguez, Director of Military Family Advocacy, testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee." Below the photo was a brass nameplate that read, "With gratitude for teaching us the true meaning of service and dignity." "There's something else," Richard added. "We've rewritten our wills. a significant portion of our estate will go to the Military Family Foundation. We want our legacy to reflect the values you've taught us." Elena felt tears forming in her eyes for the first time that evening. "Patricia, Richard, you don't have to." "Yes, we do," Patricia interrupted firmly. "Elena, you could have destroyed our family after what we did to you. Instead, you've shown us how to be better people. This foundation, this legislation, the thousands of families you've helped, that's the legacy we want to be part of." As the four of them stood together on the terrace, Elena reflected on the extraordinary journey from that humiliating evening to this moment of triumph and reconciliation. The viral video that had started as a family's prejudice exposed had evolved into a movement for military family advocacy. Her phone buzzed with a text from General Hawkins. "Congratulations on tonight's event. The President wants to discuss expanding the military family advocacy program nationally. Can you come to Washington next week?" Elena showed the text to David, who grinned. "From band family member to White House meetings. That might be a new record for career advancement." Patricia leaned over to read the text. "Elena, I hope you know that whatever opportunities come your way, you have our complete support. Richard and I are prepared to do whatever it takes to help David so you can continue this work." Elena looked at her transformed in-laws, her recovering husband, and the lights of Chicago twinkling across the lake. Sometimes, she thought, the most painful moments in life were exactly what you needed to discover your true purpose. "You know what?" Elena said, raising her champagne glass. "Here's to family, the one you're born into, the one you choose, and the one you create through shared purpose." As they toasted together on the terrace where Elena's journey had begun, she realized that Patricia Morrison's attempt to humiliate her had accidentally created the most important work of her life. It was, Elena thought with a smile, the most expensive mistake in Morrison family history, and the most valuable lesson they'd ever learned. 3 days after the Chicago Gala, Elena Rodriguez found herself walking through the West Wing of the White House, her military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. The same woman who had been deemed not sophisticated enough for a country club party was now being escorted to meet with the President of the United States about expanding military family advocacy nationwide. "Colonel Rodriguez," said Chief of Staff Margaret Chen, leading Elena down the hallway lined with portraits of former presidents. "The President has been following your work closely. The success of the Military Family Healthcare Support Act has exceeded all projections, and frankly, we need your expertise on a much larger scale." Elena nodded, still processing the surreal nature of her journey. 18 months ago, she'd been a retired Marine struggling to pay medical bills. Now she was being briefed on national policy in the most powerful building in America. They entered the Oval Office, where President Sarah Williams, the same Congressman Williams who had initially offered Elena the Oversight Subcommittee position, stood to greet her with a warm smile. "Elena," the President said, extending her hand, "it's wonderful to see you again. Though I have to say, the last time we met, I never imagined I'd be asking you to help reshape military family policy for the entire nation." "Madam President," Elena replied, accepting the handshake with military precision, "it's an honor to be here." President Williams gestured toward the seating area, where several other officials were already assembled. Elena recognized Secretary of Defense James Morrison, no relation to David's family, and Veterans Affairs Secretary Dr. Lisa Park. "Elena, let me be direct," President Williams began, as they settled into chairs. "The Military Family Healthcare Support Act has been so successful that we're getting pressure from Congress to expand it exponentially. But more than that, your story has resonated with military families globally. We've had inquiries from NATO allies about implementing similar programs." Secretary Morrison leaned forward. "Colonel Rodriguez, in the 14 months since your viral moment, we've seen a measurable improvement in military retention rates. Families aren't leaving service due to medical crises at the rate they were before. Your work is literally strengthening our national defense." Elena felt a mix of pride and responsibility. "That's gratifying to hear, Mr. Secretary. But I hope we're not just keeping people in service. I hope we're making service more sustainable for families." "Exactly why we need to talk," President Williams said. "Elena, I want to offer you a new position, Director of National Military Family Policy." It would be cabinet adjacent, reporting directly to me, with authority to coordinate military family support across all agencies. Elena blinked, processing the magnitude of what was being offered. Madam President, that's an extraordinary opportunity, but I have to ask about the scope and expectations. Dr. Park opened a folder. Elena, the position would oversee a budget of $2.3 billion annually. You'd have staff across 12 agencies, from defense to health and human services to education. Essentially, you'd be the federal government's chief advocate for military families. The position would also involve significant travel, Chief of Staff Chen added. International conferences, meetings with allied nations, congressional testimony. We'd be asking you to become the global face of military family advocacy. Elena thought immediately of David, who was now healthy, but still needed regular monitoring. I appreciate the confidence, but my husband's health remains a priority. I can't accept a position that would require extensive travel without ensuring his care is managed. President Williams smiled. Elena, one of the reasons we want you for this role is because you understand work-life balance from personal experience. The position comes with a full support staff, including medical liaison services for your family. We're not asking you to sacrifice your personal life. We're asking you to help us build systems so other military families don't have to make those sacrifices. Secretary Morrison pulled out his phone. Elena, I want to show you something. He displayed a news article from the Military Times. This week's cover story is titled The Rodriguez Effect. It details how your advocacy work has inspired similar programs in Canada, Australia, and the UK. Military families around the world are citing your story as motivation for seeking better support systems. Elena read the headline with amazement. The Rodriguez Effect? Your viral moment has become a case study in policy schools, Dr. Park explained. Georgetown, Harvard, and George Washington University are all using your story to teach students about how personal advocacy can drive systemic change. President Williams leaned back in her chair. Elena, I've been in politics for 20 years. I've never seen a single incident create such sustained, positive policy momentum. But more than that, I've never seen someone handle unexpected public attention with such grace and effectiveness. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from David. Whatever they're offering you, say yes. Patricia is here making your favorite soup, Richard is organizing your military files, and I'm feeling great. We've got this covered. Elena smiled, showing the text to President Williams. My husband seems to think I should accept. Smart man, the president laughed. Elena, there's something else. The UN has asked if you'd be willing to speak at their international conference on military family support next month in Geneva. They want to use your program as a model for peacekeeping forces worldwide. Chief of Staff Chen handed Elena a thick folder. These are letters from military families around the world, thanking you for your advocacy. We receive about 50 per week now. They're not just from American families, they're from military spouses in 23 different countries. Elena opened the folder and read the first letter, from a British Army wife whose husband had been injured in Afghanistan. Colonel Rodriguez, your story gave me the courage to advocate for better support when my husband lost his leg. Because of programs inspired by your work, our family didn't have to choose between his recovery and our financial survival. Elena, President Williams said gently, you started this journey trying to attend a family anniversary party. Now you have the opportunity to change military family policy for the entire world. I can't think of a better example of turning personal adversity into global advocacy. Elena looked around the Oval Office, thinking about the surreal journey from Patricia Morrison's condescending dismissal to this moment. Madam President, if I accept this position, I have some conditions. Name them. First, the programs we develop must be based on real family input, not bureaucratic assumptions. I want regular listening sessions with military spouses from all branches and ranks. President Williams nodded. Agreed. Second, success must be measured by family outcomes, not program enrollment numbers. I don't care how many people sign up for services. I care about whether families stay together and thrive. Absolutely. Third, I want to maintain my connection to direct service. I don't want to become so focused on policy that I lose touch with the families we're trying to help. Secretary Morrison smiled. Elena, those conditions tell me exactly why you're the right person for this job. Elena took a deep breath, thinking about David's text message and the thousands of military families who had shared their stories with her over the past year. In that case, Madam President, I accept. President Williams stood, extending her hand again. Welcome to the cabinet team, Director Rodriguez. I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of something extraordinary. As Elena shook the president's hand, she thought about Patricia Morrison, who was at that moment making soup in Elena's kitchen. The woman who had once tried to exclude Elena from a family gathering had inadvertently launched her into the highest levels of national service. Madam President, Elena said with a slight smile, my mother-in-law is going to be absolutely beside herself when she hears about this appointment. In a good way, I hope? Elena laughed. These days, Patricia Morrison is my biggest supporter. She's gone from trying to ban me from parties to bragging about me to anyone who will listen. President Williams chuckled. Well, she certainly has a lot to brag about now. Welcome aboard, Director Rodriguez. As Elena left the White House, she realized that her story had evolved far beyond family drama or even viral fame. She was now positioned to create lasting change for military families around the world, all because she'd had the courage to stand up for herself in a country club foyer 18 months earlier. 6 months into her role as Director of National Military Family Policy, Elena Rodriguez stood before an audience of 1,200 delegates at the United Nations office in Geneva, representing military organizations from 47 countries. The same woman who had been told she lacked sophistication for a country club conversation was now delivering the keynote address on international military family support policy. Distinguished delegates, Elena began in fluent Spanish before switching to English, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. 2 years ago, I was a military spouse, facing an impossible choice between my career and my family's medical needs. Today, that personal crisis has evolved into a global movement supporting over 100,000 military families across 6 continents. In the VIP section, she could see David sitting with Patricia and Richard Morrison, who had insisted on attending what Patricia called the most important speech in our family's history. The transformation of her in-laws continued to amaze Elena. Patricia had become so invested in military family advocacy that she'd learned basic Spanish to better communicate with Latino military spouses in Chicago. The data is compelling, Elena continued, advancing to her first slide showing global statistics. Since implementing family-centered military support policies, participating nations have seen an average 34% reduction in military personnel leaving service due to family medical crises. Retention rates have improved across all participating countries, strengthening our collective defense capabilities. General Marie Dubois from the French Armed Forces raised her hand. Director Rodriguez, can you speak to the economic impact of these programs? Some of our finance ministries are concerned about implementation costs. Elena had anticipated this question. Excellent point, General Dubois. Our analysis shows that every dollar invested in military family support returns $3.40 in reduced recruitment costs, improved retention, and increased family productivity. The Canadian Armed Forces reported saving $47 million last year alone through reduced turnover. Elena clicked to her next slide, showing testimonials from military families around the world. But beyond economics, we're talking about human dignity. This is Staff Sergeant Chen Wei from Singapore, whose wife was able to continue her career as a physician while caring for their son with cerebral palsy. This is Captain Maria Santos from Brazil, who received emergency funding when her husband developed kidney disease. Elena paused, looking directly at the camera broadcasting the conference live. These families aren't asking for special treatment. They're asking for the same support that any employer would provide during a medical crisis. When we invest in military families, we invest in military readiness. Colonel James Okafor from Nigeria stood up. Director Rodriguez, your viral story became famous in Africa as well. But some critics argue that your experience was unique to American social dynamics. How do we address cultural differences in implementing these programs? Elena smiled, remembering her early days of navigating international military relationships. Colonel Okafor, that's perhaps the most important question we can ask. Family dynamics vary dramatically across cultures, but the fundamental challenge, balancing military service with family caregiving, is universal. She advanced to a slide showing program adaptations across different countries. In Japan, we focused on multi-generational support, recognizing the cultural importance of caring for elderly parents. In Germany, the emphasis is on flexible deployment schedules for single parents. In Australia, the priority is geographic flexibility given the vast distances families face. Elena paused, allowing the translator to catch up in multiple languages. The genius of military family support isn't in creating identical programs. It's in recognizing that strong families create strong militaries, regardless of cultural context. Dr. Sarah Al-Rashid, from the UAE Military Medical Corps, approached the microphone. Director Rodriguez, can you address the role of social media in modern military family advocacy? Your story went viral, but not all families have that platform. Dr. Al-Rashid, that's crucial to address. My viral moment was accidental and, frankly, unwelcome. But it taught us something important about modern advocacy. Personal stories have power, but systemic change requires institutional commitment. Elena clicked to her final presentation slide, showing a global map with program implementations. We've learned that sustainable change happens when military leadership makes family support a strategic priority, not just a social media moment. The UAE's program, for example, has achieved remarkable results without any viral videos, just consistent, well-funded family support policies. Ambassador Sarah Chen from the UN Peacekeeping Operations stood up. Director Rodriguez, we're considering implementing these programs for UN peacekeeping forces. What advice would you give for international, multinational military families? Elena had been hoping for this question. Ambassador Chen, peacekeeping families face unique challenges, multiple deployments, international moves, children with different citizenship statuses. We're piloting a program with NATO that addresses exactly these issues. She gestured to General Patricia Hawkins, who had flown in from the Pentagon specifically for this moment. General Hawkins will be announcing our International Military Family Compact, a framework allowing participating nations to share family support resources across borders. General Hawkins stood, her presence commanding immediate attention. Ladies and gentlemen, effective immediately, military families from participating nations will have access to coordinated medical care, emergency funding, and family support services regardless of where they're stationed. Director Rodriguez has helped us realize that military family support is a collective security issue. The auditorium erupted in applause. Elena watched delegates from dozens of countries standing and clapping, many of them pulling out phones to text their military leadership about implementing these programs immediately. After the formal session ended, Elena found herself surrounded by military officials and government ministers, all wanting to discuss implementation details. Patricia Morrison, who had been watching from the VIP section, approached with tears in her eyes. Elena, Patricia said, her voice trembling with emotion, watching you speak to world leaders about military family dignity. I keep thinking about that horrible night when I tried to exclude you from our anniversary party. I'm so ashamed of who I was then, and so proud of who you've become. Richard nodded, putting his arm around his wife. Elena, we've learned so much from watching your journey. You've taught us that real class comes from service, not status. Real sophistication comes from making other people's lives better. David, looking healthy and energetic, joined the conversation. And the best part is, this is just the beginning. Elena, show them the invitation that came this morning. Elena pulled out her phone, displaying an email from Buckingham Palace. Her Majesty the Queen would like to invite Director Rodriguez to speak at the Commonwealth Military Family Conference next month in London, Patricia gasped. The Queen? Elena, you're going to meet the Queen? Apparently so. Elena laughed. Though I have to admit, after the country club incident, I'm much more nervous about family dinners than royal audiences. Colonel Okafor, who had been listening nearby, approached the group. Director Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you personally. Your programs have already helped 12 Nigerian military families avoid the financial devastation that medical crises used to cause. You've given us tools to support our people better. As the evening reception began, Elena found herself in conversations with defense ministers, military spouses, and policy experts from around the world. Each conversation reinforced the global impact of work that had started with a personal family crisis in a Chicago country club. Later, as they walked along Lake Geneva, David took Elena's hand. You know what I love most about this whole experience? 2 years ago, my parents thought you weren't sophisticated enough to talk to a federal judge. Tonight, you were setting international military policy with defense ministers from 47 countries. Elena squeezed his hand, looking out over the moonlit lake. You know what I love most? That your parents have become 2 of the most effective military family advocates in Chicago. Patricia volunteers at the VA hospital 3 days a week now. And she's good at it, David added proudly. Turns out her organizational skills and social connections are perfect for coordinating family support services. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from General Hawkins. Elena, the president wants to discuss nominating you for the Nobel Peace Prize. Your work on international military family cooperation apparently qualifies. Can we talk tomorrow? Elena showed the message to David and his parents, who stared at it in stunned silence. Nobel Peace Prize? Patricia whispered. Elena, do you realize you might win the Nobel Peace Prize? Elena looked at her transformed mother-in-law, thinking about the extraordinary journey from that painful evening 2 years ago. Patricia, 2 years ago you told me I wasn't sophisticated enough for your social circle. Now you're asking if I might win the Nobel Prize. I think we've both learned something about assumptions and possibilities. Patricia laughed through her tears. Elena Rodriguez, you are the most sophisticated person I've ever known, and I'm honored to be your family. 8 months after the Geneva conference, Elena Rodriguez sat in her Pentagon office, reviewing the most surreal document she'd ever received, her official nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. The citation read, for outstanding contributions to international military family welfare and her pioneering work in transforming military support systems worldwide, leading to measurable improvements in global military stability and family dignity. Her assistant, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim, knocked on the door. Ma'am, the Norwegian Nobel Committee representative is here for your interview, and your family has arrived for the press conference. Elena straightened her uniform. She'd returned to wearing military dress for official functions, finding that it lent additional gravity to her international advocacy work. Send in the Norwegian delegation first, then we'll do the family press conference. Dr. Astrid Larsen from the Nobel Committee entered with 2 colleagues, all carrying thick files documenting Elena's global impact. Director Rodriguez, thank you for making time for this interview. The committee needs to understand the scope and sustainability of your peace-building work. Elena gestured to the conference table, where she'd prepared extensive documentation. Dr. Larsen, I'm honored by the nomination, but I want to be clear. This work has always been about practical problem-solving, not peace-building in the traditional sense. That's precisely why your nomination is so compelling, Dr. Larsen replied, opening her file. Traditional peace work often focuses on ending conflicts. Your work prevents conflicts by strengthening the families that support military personnel worldwide. Elena's colleague, Dr. Maria Santos, who had flown in from the UN for the interview, joined the conversation. Director Rodriguez, perhaps you could walk the committee through the measurable impact of your programs? Elena clicked to her presentation, which had become a refined masterpiece after dozens of international conferences. Since implementation began 3 years ago, we've seen a 47% reduction in military family financial crises across participating nations. More significantly, divorce rates among military couples have dropped by 31%, and children of military families show improved academic performance and psychological stability. Dr. Larsen made notes rapidly. And the international cooperation aspect? Extraordinary, Elena replied. We now have 52 countries participating in the International Military Family Compact. Military families can access support services regardless of where they're stationed globally. This has eliminated a major source of stress for international peacekeeping operations. Dr. Eric Johansson, another committee member, leaned forward. Director Rodriguez, your story began with a personal family conflict that went viral. Some critics argue that your platform was built on social media attention rather than substantial policy work. How do you respond? Elena had fielded this question countless times, but she appreciated the committee's directness. Dr. Johansson, the viral moment was accidental and personally painful. But it revealed something important. Millions of military families worldwide were struggling with the same issues I faced. The attention gave us political capital to create systemic solutions. She advanced to her next slide, showing legislative achievements. In 3 years, we've passed comprehensive military family support legislation in 12 countries, established international emergency funding networks, and created family-centered deployment policies that have improved both military readiness and family stability. Dr. Larson nodded approvingly. The committee is particularly impressed by the sustainability metrics. Most advocacy initiatives show initial success but fade over time. Your programs continue to expand and improve. That's because we built them around institutional change, not individual advocacy, Elena explained. Military families don't need heroes. They need systems that work consistently, regardless of who's in charge. After the Norwegian delegation completed their interview, Elena prepared for the press conference. Through her office window, she could see David, Patricia, and Richard waiting in the Pentagon's media room, along with military families from around the world who had flown in to support her nomination. Lieutenant Colonel Kim announced the press conference. Ladies and gentlemen, Director Elena Rodriguez will make a brief statement about her Nobel Peace Prize nomination, followed by questions. Elena approached the podium, looking out at journalists from major international outlets. 3 years ago, I experienced a family conflict that accidentally became public. Today, that moment has evolved into international policy affecting over 200,000 military families worldwide. She paused, making eye contact with David, who gave her an encouraging nod. The Nobel Peace Prize nomination is humbling, but it's important to understand what this recognition represents. It's not about one person's advocacy. It's about military families worldwide demanding dignity and support. CNN's military correspondent raised her hand. Director Rodriguez, how has your relationship with your in-laws evolved since the viral incident? Elena smiled, gesturing toward the Morrison family. My mother-in-law, Patricia Morrison, is now one of the most effective military family advocates in the United States. She's proven that people can grow, change, and redirect their privileges toward service. Our family conflict became the foundation for our family's shared mission. Patricia Morrison stood up in the press room, tears in her eyes. If I may, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone system, I want to publicly acknowledge that 3 years ago, I tried to exclude Elena from our family anniversary party because I made prejudiced assumptions about her background and worth. The press room fell silent as Patricia continued. Elena could have destroyed our family after what I did. Instead, she's shown us how to be better people. This Nobel nomination represents not just Elena's work, but the possibility of redemption and growth for anyone willing to examine their own biases. BBC's international correspondent asked, Director Rodriguez, what's next if you receive the Nobel Prize? Elena considered the question carefully. The prize would provide an incredible platform to expand military family support globally. We're already in discussions with the African Union and ASEAN about implementing comprehensive family support programs. The recognition would accelerate that work significantly. General Patricia Hawkins, who had arrived for the press conference, approached the microphone. If I may add, Director Rodriguez has transformed military family policy not through political maneuvering, but through demonstrating that supporting families strengthens military effectiveness. This is peace-building through family stability. After the press conference, Elena found herself in her office with David and his parents, processing the surreal nature of the day. Elena, Richard Morrison said quietly, I need to tell you something. 3 years ago, when Patricia and James tried to ban you from our anniversary party, I didn't stop them. I was ashamed of you, ashamed of what I thought you represented. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. Now I'm ashamed of who I was then. You've taught our entire family what real sophistication looks like, using whatever platform you have to help others. I'm proud to be your father-in-law. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. Richard, We've all grown. That's what families do. They help each other become better people. Patricia pulled out her phone, showing Elena a text message. Elena, this came from James while we were in the press conference. He says his entire business is now focused on supporting veteran-owned companies, and he credits watching your journey with changing his understanding of what real success looks like. David, looking healthy and proud, put his arm around Elena. You know what I love most about this Nobel nomination? It started with you being excluded from a family party, and now the entire world is celebrating your inclusion in the most prestigious recognition of peace work. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Larson. Director Rodriguez, the committee's preliminary vote was unanimous. Congratulations, you're going to Oslo in December. Elena stared at the message, then showed it to her family. Patricia Morrison, the woman who had once questioned Elena's sophistication, was the first to speak. Elena Rodriguez, Patricia said with absolute conviction, you are going to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And more importantly, you're going to use that platform to help even more military families around the world. Elena looked around her Pentagon office, surrounded by the family that had once rejected her and now celebrated her achievements as their own. Sometimes, she thought, the most painful moments in life were exactly what you needed to discover not just your purpose but your capacity to transform others along the way. December 10th, Nobel Prize Day in Oslo, Norway. Elena Rodriguez stood before her hotel room mirror, adjusting the elegant navy blue dress that Patricia Morrison had insisted on purchasing for the occasion. The same woman who had once deemed Elena unsophisticated enough for a country club party had spent weeks coordinating with Norwegian designers to ensure Elena looked perfect for the most prestigious ceremony in the world. Elena, David said from behind her, looking handsome in his formal tuxedo. Are you ready for this? Elena turned to face her husband, who was now completely cancer-free and had gained back most of the weight he'd lost during treatment. I'm not sure anyone can be ready to accept the Nobel Peace Prize, but I'm ready to use the platform to help more military families. A knock at the door revealed Patricia and Richard Morrison, both impeccably dressed and carrying themselves with a dignity that Elena had never seen from them before. Patricia's eyes immediately filled with tears upon seeing Elena. Elena, my dear, Patricia said, her voice trembling with emotion, you look absolutely beautiful. But more than that, you look like someone who deserves every bit of recognition she's about to receive. Richard nodded, his own eyes moist. Elena, 3.5 years ago, I was ashamed to call you my daughter-in-law. Today, I'm prouder of you than I've ever been of anyone in my life. Elena felt her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her composure. Patricia, Richard, you've both changed so much. The work you've done with military families, the advocacy, the fundraising. You've become the people I always hoped you could be. Another knock interrupted them. James Morrison entered with his wife and teenage children, all dressed formally for the ceremony. James, who had once mocked Elena's military service, now ran a successful consulting firm dedicated entirely to supporting veteran-owned businesses. Aunt Elena, said James's 16-year-old daughter Sarah, I just wanted you to know that my entire school is watching the ceremony today. You're like, famous now. And not just social media famous, Nobel Prize famous. Elena laughed, appreciating the teenager's perspective. Sarah, I hope the lesson isn't about becoming famous. I hope it's about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Oh, we get that, said James's 14-year-old son Michael. Dad tells us the story all the time about how he was mean to you at the anniversary party, and how you taught our whole family to be better people. It's like our family's origin story now. James looked embarrassed but proud. Elena, I tell that story because I want my kids to understand that growth is possible, even for adults who mess up badly. You gave our family a second chance to be decent people. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from General Hawkins. Elena, the King of Norway specifically asked to meet with you before the ceremony. Apparently, his son is a military officer, and the royal family has been following your work closely. Before Elena could respond, Lieutenant Colonel Kim entered with final ceremony details. Ma'am, the Nobel Committee has asked if you'd like to dedicate your acceptance speech to anyone specifically. They often announce dedications during the introduction. Elena looked around the room at David and the Morrison family, thinking about the extraordinary journey they'd all taken together. I'd like to dedicate the speech to military families worldwide, and to the power of people to change and grow when confronted with their mistakes. Patricia wiped away tears. Elena, that's perfect. Because this whole experience has taught me that the most important thing isn't avoiding mistakes. It's what you do after you make them. As they prepared to leave for Oslo City Hall, Elena received a call from Dr. Astrid Larsen from the Nobel Committee. Director Rodriguez, I wanted to personally inform you that your acceptance speech will be broadcast live to 94 countries. We estimate the global audience will exceed 200 million people. Elena felt a moment of nervousness. 200 million people would hear her words, including every military family whose story had contributed to her work. Dr. Larsen, that's both humbling and terrifying. Director Rodriguez, you've addressed the United Nations, the U.S. Congress, and heads of state from dozens of countries. Today is simply the largest audience for the same message you've been sharing, that dignity and support for families strengthens everything else. As their motorcade approached Oslo City Hall, Elena could see thousands of people lining the streets, many holding signs supporting military families and veterans. David pointed out a group of American military spouses who had flown to Oslo specifically for the ceremony. Elena, look, David said, indicating a section of the crowd where people were holding pictures of military families. Those are families whose lives have been changed by your programs. Elena saw a woman holding a photo of her wounded veteran husband with the sign, "Thank you for giving us hope." Another family held a banner reading, "Military families matter. Thank you, Elena Rodriguez." But perhaps the most moving sight was a group of elderly Norwegian veterans, standing at attention in their old uniforms, saluting as the motorcade passed. Many had tears in their eyes. They understand, Patricia said quietly, watching the elderly veterans. They understand what it means to serve, and what it means to support the families who serve alongside their loved ones. Inside Oslo City Hall, the ceremony was magnificent. Elena sat on the stage with the other Nobel laureates, looking out at an audience that included royalty, heads of state, and representatives from military organizations worldwide. When her name was called, Elena approached the podium to thunderous applause. In the audience, she could see David and the Morrison family standing and clapping, tears streaming down their faces. "Your Majesties, distinguished guests, fellow laureates," Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. "I stand before you today not as an individual achievement, but as a representative of military families worldwide who demand dignity, support, and recognition." She paused, looking directly at the television cameras that were broadcasting to 200 million people. 3.5 years ago, I experienced a family conflict that accidentally became public. Today, that moment has evolved into international policy affecting over 300,000 military families across 68 countries. Elena's voice grew stronger as she continued. But this prize isn't just about policy changes or program statistics. It's about the fundamental principle that strong families create strong societies, and that peace begins with supporting the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others. She looked toward the Morrison family in the audience. This journey has also taught me about the power of personal transformation. People can change, families can heal, and mistakes can become the foundation for meaningful growth. As Elena continued her speech, outlining her vision for expanding military family support globally, she noticed something remarkable happening in the audience. Military officers from different countries were standing and applauding together, showing unprecedented unity around family support issues. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. But for Elena, the most meaningful moment came when she saw Patricia Morrison standing and applauding, with tears streaming down her face, surrounded by military families from around the world. Later, at the Nobel banquet, the King of Norway approached Elena personally. "Director Rodriguez, your work has inspired military family programs in Norway as well. You've shown us that supporting families isn't just compassionate policy, it's strategic necessity." As the evening wound down, Elena found herself on the balcony of the Grand Hotel, with David and his parents, looking out over the lights of Oslo. "Elena," Patricia said quietly, "I keep thinking about that night at the country club, when I tried to exclude you from our anniversary party. I thought I was protecting our family's reputation. Instead, I almost destroyed the best thing that ever happened to our family." Elena took Patricia's hand. "Patricia, that night led to everything we've accomplished since then. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives are exactly what we need to find our true purpose. David raised his champagne glass. To family. The one you're born into, the one you choose, and the one you build through shared commitment to making the world better. As they toasted together on the balcony overlooking Oslo, Elena realized that her journey from excluded family member to Nobel Peace Prize winner was really a story about the possibility of transformation for individuals, for families, and for the world. 5 years after the Riverside Country Club incident, Elena Rodriguez stood once again in the marble foyer where her journey had begun. But this time, the space was filled with military families from around the world, gathered for the inaugural Elena Rodriguez International Military Family Unity Conference, hosted, incredibly, by Patricia and Richard Morrison themselves. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia Morrison announced from the same spot where she had once tried to humiliate Elena, "welcome to what I consider the most important event our family has ever hosted. 5 years ago, in this very location, I made the worst mistake of my life. Today, we celebrate how that mistake became the catalyst for a global movement." Elena watched from the crowd, wearing her Medal of Honor, awarded by the president just months after her Nobel Prize for her continued service to military families. Beside her stood David, now 5 years cancer-free and serving as the executive director of the Morrison Foundation for Military Families, which his parents had established with their entire fortune. "You know," David whispered to Elena, "I used to be embarrassed by my family's wealth and arrogance. Now I'm amazed by what they've done with their privilege once they understood how to use it properly." The statistics displayed behind Patricia told an incredible story. 847,000 military families across 89 countries now benefited from programs inspired by Elena's work. Military divorce rates had plummeted globally, recruitment and retention rates had reached historic highs. Most remarkably, 23 nations had reported that military family stability had measurably improved their overall national security. But the most powerful moment came when Patricia called Elena to the podium, not as a guest speaker, but as family. "5 years ago," Patricia began, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone system, "I stood in this room and told my daughter-in-law that she wasn't sophisticated enough to be around important people. I judged her based on her background, her ethnicity, and my own prejudiced assumptions about military families." The room was completely silent except for the soft clicking of cameras documenting this moment. "I was wrong about everything," Patricia continued, tears streaming down her face. "Elena Rodriguez is the most sophisticated person I have ever known. Not because of her Nobel Prize, not because of her congressional testimony, not because she's advised world leaders. She's sophisticated because she responded to cruelty with dignity, to exclusion with grace, and to humiliation with forgiveness." Elena felt her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her as Patricia continued. "But more than that, Elena taught our entire family that true sophistication isn't about the cost of your clothes or the exclusivity of your social circle. It's about using whatever platform you have, whether it's a country club membership or a Nobel Prize, to make other people's lives better." Patricia gestured toward the crowd of military families. "These families aren't here because Elena is famous. They're here because she saw their struggles and refused to accept that sacrifice and service had to mean choosing between family and dignity." Elena approached the podium, looking out at faces that represented every branch of military service from dozens of countries. In the front row sat Mrs. Chen Wei, the Singapore military spouse whose story Elena had shared at the UN. Beside her was Captain Santos from Brazil, Staff Sergeant Johnson from Canada, and Colonel Okafor from Nigeria, all of them living proof that Elena's work had transcended borders and cultures. "5 years ago," Elena began, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had first emerged in this very room, "I came to this building hoping to celebrate with my husband's family. Instead, I learned something invaluable about the power of standing up for yourself with dignity." She paused, making eye contact with Patricia, who was wiping away tears. "But I also learned something about the capacity for human growth. The woman who tried to exclude me from this room 5 years ago has spent the last 3 years volunteering 40 hours a week at veterans' hospitals. She's learned Spanish to better communicate with Latino military families. She's donated millions of dollars to military family support programs." Elena's voice grew stronger. Patricia Morrison taught me that the most important measure of a person isn't their worst moment, it's what they do after that moment. She could have remained defensive and resentful after our viral incident. Instead, she chose to examine her own biases and transform her life around service to others. The applause was thunderous, led by military families who understood the profound courage it takes to admit mistakes and change completely. The real lesson of this story, Elena continued, isn't about viral videos or Nobel Prizes. It's about the truth that dignity is something no one can take from you. You can only surrender it yourself. When people try to diminish you based on their assumptions, you have a choice. You can shrink to fit their expectations, or you can stand tall in your own truth. Elena looked directly at the cameras broadcasting the event globally. To every military family watching this, to every person who has ever been judged by their background rather than their character, to every individual who has ever been told they don't belong, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Your worth is not determined by other people's ability to recognize it. She paused, her voice becoming more personal. And to anyone who has ever made the mistake of judging others based on prejudice or assumptions, it's never too late to change. Patricia Morrison is living proof that we can all grow beyond our worst moments and become the people our best values call us to be. As Elena concluded her remarks, something unprecedented happened. Patricia Morrison stepped forward and, in front of the international military community, publicly embraced Elena as her daughter. Elena Rodriguez, Patricia said clearly into the microphone, "I am honored to be your family. You have taught me that true class comes from character, true sophistication comes from service, and true worth comes from making other people's lives better." Later that evening, as the conference wound down, Elena found herself back on the country club terrace with David and his parents. The same lake stretched before them, but everything else had changed completely. "Elena," Richard said quietly, "I want to tell you something. 5 years ago, our family's legacy was built on accumulated wealth and social status. Today, our legacy is built on service to military families around the world. You gave us a chance to become people worth being proud of." David, looking healthy and content, raised his champagne glass. "To the most extraordinary journey a family has ever taken together, from prejudice to understanding, from exclusion to inclusion, from judgment to service." Elena's phone buzzed with a message that made her smile. It was from Agent Morrison, the security chief from that first evening. "Ma'am, just wanted you to know, Madam President is now standard protocol for addressing senior military family advocates worldwide. Your title became a movement." As they toasted together under the stars, Elena reflected on the incredible transformation that had begun with a viral moment of family conflict. A woman's dignity in the face of humiliation had inspired international policy. A family's willingness to confront their own prejudices had created a foundation serving hundreds of thousands of military families. A personal story of standing up for yourself had become a global lesson about respect, growth, and the power of forgiveness. "You know what amazes me most about this whole story?" Elena said, looking at Patricia and Richard with genuine affection. "It's not that I went from being banned from a family party to winning the Nobel Peace Prize. It's that you both went from people I was afraid to disappoint to people whose approval means the world to me." Patricia smiled through her tears. "Elena, my dear, the approval has always been yours to give or withhold. We're just grateful you chose to keep loving us despite our failures." As Elena looked out over the lake where her journey had begun, she realized that the most important transformation hadn't been her own rise to international prominence. It had been her family's discovery that love, respect, and dignity were choices they could make every single day. Sometimes, Elena thought with a smile, the worst moments in your life are exactly what you need to discover not just who you really are, but who the people around you are capable of becoming. The viral video that had started as a family's public humiliation had become a story about redemption, dignity, and the extraordinary things that happen when people choose growth over pride, service over status, and love over judgment. And in the end, that was the most sophisticated lesson of all. True sophistication isn't about what you have, it's about what you do with what you have to make other people's lives better. Dignity isn't something others can give you or take away. It's something you choose to maintain regardless of how others treat you. And the most important measure of a person isn't their worst moment, but what they choose to do after that moment. blank underscore blank.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.